So the Lord has graced us with wonderful opening banter for this episode, Mike. You want me
Oh,
to tell
oh,
you
the
about it?
Lord, huh? The Lord in
It's
quotes.
an act of God. So I come down into my basement to do the recording, and my kids have all their video game stuff left all over the floor from the night before.
Yeah, your kids. Okay, sure.
Yeah.
I'll play along. I'll play
And my
along.
dog took a big old steaming pile right on one of their headsets, and I snapped a photo of it, and I sent it to them, and they were quite upset. And I
And you
felt
said, "This
pretty
is
good
a
about
metaphor.
this
This is
is
a metaphor."
this is why we get the dog out, and this is why we clean up our stuff. They took a big old Babadookie right on those
Oh, wow.
headsets.
Welcome to the Voyage podcast, a show that traverses the oceans of myth and legend through the lens of Catholic theology and philosophy. Come aboard as we set sail in pursuit of the heroic life and Christian virtue, with your hosts, Mike Schramm and Jacob Platty.
Well, on that note, I'll welcome you, Jacob, and welcome all of you guys to this episode of the Voyage podcast, where we're going to be, I don't know, I guess we're doing a little bit of monster in the house, but what do we mean by house? What do we mean by monster, right? Who is the monster? And we're going to be talking most specifically. I mean, we'll bring some general ideas into here. We're going to do a little bit of exorcism stuff too. But most specifically, what is the example we're going to be going through? What's the monster in this case, Jacob, that we're going to be talking about?
Well, if you were paying close attention to my witty little joke in the opening, the Babadook. The Babadook.
Yes, so the cult classic, I guess you could call it at this point, or
I think it's destined to be a cult classic. Maybe not
how
enough
old
time.
is it anyway? Is it like 10 years
like
old
2014
now,
maybe. I feel
okay,
I'm going to
so
say
going on,
2014.
Yeah, it's about 10, if not. At
Yeah,
our
it's
age,
about
we
a
just
decade.
round up.
Yeah,
We
give it another
round
10
up,
years.
so.
We'll see if it's got the cult status, or maybe it's just classic. The nuances
I mean,
of these things, Mike.
Well, and we are going to get into some of those, right? I mean, it obviously has, even if it's not intentional, it's definitely got some spiritual implications that we both have found interesting. And this is just yet another recommendation by Jacob that I had, not really seen before, not really paid close attention
This
to.
month is my month, folks.
Yes.
When I was selling,
finally.
Yeah, well, honestly, Mike, you want to do a Monster in the House theme. You're like, let's do something like Monster in the House. And I was like, I have got the movie for you, sir, because this one works on levels. And
which just to back up really quick, I mean, if you haven't, because there's going to be an episode on strictly just the genre monster in the house. And so when we refer to monster in the house, it's a genre of horror movie or of film where, as the title says, there is a monster in the house. Now, what do we mean by monster? What do we mean by house? That's what we're going to kind of get into. And this movie, The Babadook, kind of plays with those themes a little bit, plays with that idea. But
yeah, quite.
Sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
Argue. No, this is a kind of a grueling movie. I mean, maybe some people wouldn't feel that way. I know my wife basically refuses to watch it with me again because this is a movie about the relationship between a mother and her child, and that relationship is very strained. And it's about mental illness, and it's some of these
about
things,
grief,
grief, all that stuff. And not everything applies to my wife. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, she grieves the fact that she's married to me. But
I was gonna say, no, it's the idea of losing you, Jacob. That's what it is, right?
Oh,
Because that's
what it
in the
is.
story.
Yeah, exactly.
In the premise, the mother slash
the very-
wife has lost her husband and the father, and so that's one of the things that we just going into the story is already been established. So,
but it does such a visceral job of ramping up the depression and grief and mental illness and straining the relationship between the mother and the child that my wife just finds it icky. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't enjoy it.
Well,
yeah, and I don't blame her. I don't blame her,
And it's Amelia, right? The main character's name. And she's a sympathetic figure in every sense of the word. Like sympathy in the sense that you are a compassionate figure, in that you feel bad, you suffer for her throughout this movie.
I read somewhere that this movie is like if The Shining characters, Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall from that movie, the
Mhm.
Stanley Kubrick flick. Um, Amelia is both Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall in this movie,
Which
and I actually think is
honestly,
a
like,
perfect that's a
I
perfect
was gonna say,
analogy, yeah.
if that's your elevator pitch, I mean, to somebody who likes scary movies, who likes horror movies, that's gotta be the best elevator pitch
Yeah,
for the
it's this movie
Babadook
in a
movie.
nutshell, absolutely,
Um,
and instead of it being about a family trapped in an isolated, like, mountain hotel, they're trapped right in the midst of society, right? They're just
mm.
so isolated and alienated from everyone around them, so even though they're surrounded by humanity, the humanity can't
Mhm.
help,
Which
and
is a
so there's
classic. I mean, that's just a classic, like, movie kind of trope too of the whole, I'm
a lot of
surrounded by people
dramas,
and
a
yet
lot
I'm
of
still
yeah,
lonely. Yeah.
alienation. I mean, this is something again, this is a 21st century flick, and I think
Mhm.
alienation is very poignant for a lot of audiences today. And so, that's what this movie speaks
Um,
to.
s so let's run through some of the other kind of expositional elements to this. If you wanna just kinda go through the
You
synopsis a
want
little
to
bit
just
before
go
we
through
get
the movie?
into, well, I
Well,
mean, until
no,
we
I
get
mean a
to the
little bit.
figure of the Babadook, and then we can kind of examine that too.
Sure, sure. This movie actually straight up opens. We hinted at this. It opens with her dreaming about the death of her husband. She's being driven to the hospital to give birth to their child, their son, and
Mhm.
they get into a car accident, and her husband dies on the way to the hospital. And the opening shots of this movie, the opening scenes of this movie does a really, really efficient and great job of basically showing us that she is a single mother. Her son has behavior issues, right? And is kind of
Some of it maybe because of the, absence of the father and how
well,
the mom's affected by it too.
in the way that the mother is dealing with her grief, which is to say, like, she's not dealing with her grief,
Mm,
and so like he loves to go into the basement. She just put all of her husband's stuff in the basement, right? No
mm,
metaphors there, and
mm.
the kid keeps going into the basement. That's where he likes to play because
Getting
he
some
feels
cabin in the
close.
woods vibes a little bit
Yeah,
too.
that's true.
Yeah.
Well, basements are never a good thing in horror movies, right? I mean,
Yeah. No,
but
exactly.
anyway, the kid goes down there because that's where all the dad stuff is, and he feels close to his dad down there. I think early on, the movie does a really good job of tying the father and the child together thematically, right? Because
Mm.
for the mother, um, to see her son is to be reminded of her dead husband, right? And
And to celebrate the birthday is a
well,
reminder
and
of
yeah, and so
the
she does. Yeah, I mean, so like, think about that. She doesn't. She actually doesn't celebrate her son's birthday. She instead has her son celebrate a birthday with his cousin, her sister's child, and they have a co-birthday because the mother can't stand on the day of her husband's death, which happens to be her son's birthday. There's no
Mhm.
celebrations going on, right? That's how deeply
Yeah.
traumatized she is by all of this. And throughout the movie, it's really heartbreaking. Like there'll be like in the very beginning, he tries to give her like a really really deep hug, and she like pushes him
Mhm.
away because it triggers
Mm.
something in her, and she actually kind of snaps him a little bit, like don't do that, you know.
Mhm.
And later on, he's like, "I love you, mom," and she's like, "Me too." It's like, ooh,
Mm. Yeah.
like,
I love spending time with you. That's her no, that's the, like, classic, friend zone response,
Yeah, I
like
know, it's the friend zone. She friend zones her kid, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
It's, and it's heartbreaking. I mean, it's heartbreaking to watch this poor
Mhm.
little kid who is legitimately the movie does sympathize with Amelia, the mother, because, like, the kid is hard.
Mhm.
It's hard, and, there's a
Well,
lot of
that's the thing too
commentary.
is, yeah, there's no, like, at first you could see it as like, oh, is the mom the bad guy? Typical, like, what is this? Did Freud make this movie? Or,
Mhm.
but you definitely, like you said, you sympathize very much
Well, because
in
he's
as a
spastic,
true way possible.
he makes everything the movie shows us in these early moments is showing us how hard her life is because of the behavior patterns of her child, right?
Why
And
can't he
because she's
just be
alone.
normal?
Well, there
Why can't he just be normal?
evidently there's a meme about that. that Mike.
Oh, evidently, yeah. So just as a little bit of a background, we'll pull the veil away for a second. I had seen the meme. I had not known what the movie was too. And then as I'm watching the movie, I had to text Jacob the picture or the meme and say, finally, I know where the source of this is.
Mhm.
And he had his snarky response of like, "Oh, glad I keep you around for the important stuff." But
Yeah. I
anyway,
think I
we'll
was
move
saying,
on.
I'm glad you're getting a rich commentary for this movie out of this. So anyway,
Cultural impact.
yeah, sure. There you go. Justified.
Yep.
This movie, let's see where we're at. So like there's a lot of tension developed between the mother and the child right out the gate. And then almost immediately, it's a very efficient. This is not a very long movie. I think it's
They
like
just find the book on the
it's
shelf.
like an hour and
find
a half.
a
Yeah,
children's book on the
this
shelf.
book appears out of
and
kind of nowhere. Mr.
Mhm.
Babadook, and so
and he's
the
also,
child,
by the way, he's also suffering from like night terrors. He's coming into her bed a lot. She's
she's
already
already
there's this monster in the house. There's
she
already
has
this quote unquote monster in the house that he is, whether he's imagining or he is seeing something, he's seeing reality, a deeper reality than
classic
maybe what we
check
are.
the closet, check under the bed stuff.
And now, like you said,
interrupting her
to,
sleep, coming into her bed at night, so she can't get any sleep. And that just gets worse.
That's when I
as the
really
movie-
started to sympathize with Amelia, by the way.
Yeah,
as
the
a
lack of
father
sleep.
young kids. That's when I was like, you know what? I get it. I'm on her side. I'm on Amelia's. So,
and she's very good.
when-
Listen, outside of the, we kind of were a little unfair to Amelia in giving all these like examples of her like friend zoning her kid and things like that. She is not unkind to her child in the beginning of this movie.
No.
You can tell that she loves her son, but she also is just so traumatized by the loss of her husband. And, and it's not easy being a single mom,
By the way, another thing that I think is interesting, and we might bring it back up later on, but her work, working in a sort of like nursing home.
She works in a dementia
home,
ward, of a nursing home, which is already extremely difficult work. It's like everything in this lady's life is
a sort of parallel to these people who are, for lack of a better term, like losing it, right? Like people who are becoming more disattached with reality, right? And so we see this kind of parallel between them who are physically, like their mind is deteriorating. And then we have her who is working with them, but she's also kind of going through something very similar too.
Yeah.
But now, finally, Mr. Babadook.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just throw one more note in there. Like the movie also does a good job, because we said at the beginning that she's isolated, right? And it shows good examples of how this isolation takes over her life, even though she's surrounded by people. So like there is a coworker that she works with who seems like a really nice guy. Seems real and the movie obviously is like, oh, hey, love interest for Amelia. And you can tell that she's kind of into it, like that's cool. But the movie immediately quashes that. Like he shows up at her house, like with a surprise.
Flowers, I think, right?
Flowers, and the kid is supposedly homesick, but he's actually expelled from school or something along those lines. And and so he's like, oh, I thought you were sick. And the kid has no filter. And he's like, oh, I'm not sick. And she's like, oh, he's just so naughty. Anyway, and he gets weirded out. Basically, he gets driven off by this weird, tense relationship between the mother and her kid. And it's just another nail in that kind of like, I don't know, it's a bad metaphor, but nail in the coffin.
No, isolation. Yeah, the isolation coffin.
The isolation coffin. There you go. I like
it. Which again, to kind of fit the whole dementia parallel, that is very isolating for the person experiencing it, right? Because then you feel like you're cut off from, everybody else because of what's happening in your own mind.
Yeah. No matter how hard you try, this relationship is going to ruin all your other relationships. And they have a neighbor next door who's super nice. Her name's Mrs. Roach, which
metaphor.
We'll get into it. But she's got cerebral palsy, and so she's like a super nice lady, but she's infirm. And there's really just she can kind of offer moral support, but they're just not in the same place in life. And so the movie gives you she's got a sister. The sister is just kind of like not a nice lady, or she's not very compassionate towards Amelia, and so like the movie actually goes out of its way.
Like she's been, because it's been what, 8 years, 10 years, so it's almost like she's reached her expiration point for compassion,
Yeah,
which
6
again, that
years.
sounds harsh, but in one sense, it's like, somebody
Yeah,
is
this
gonna
is how
like,
it goes with humans. Anyway,
yeah,
like, so the movie actually it shows you, it's like, yeah, this lady's alone. Even though she's not, she is. And it
mhm.
continues to drive that home as the movie progresses in other ways too. But the Babadook. All right, let's get to it. The Babadook.
Finally some companionship. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes.
Finally,
Um,
yeah.
so
Well, I
she
mean, he is
starts.
wearing the same hat that her husband did, right? Isn't that kind of the thing? So, but
I
anyway,
don't, well, maybe it's based on it. So
yeah.
she starts reading this book. He's like, oh, okay, I guess this book is here. All right, and so she starts reading it, but it's like a weird book, and it's kind of got creepy illustrations, and the opening lines are kind of iconic. It's if it's in a glance or is it if it's in a word or it's in a look, you can't get rid of the Babadook.
Mm,
And, we'll talk about that line because that line kinda keeps popping up throughout the movie and things like that, but as it continues to go, it basically ends with, like, you know I can't remember how the book phrases it, but it's like, "I'm such a fun guy until I'm not, and then you're gonna wish you were dead." It gets really
yeah,
dark
yeah.
really quick,
And it
and
rhymes, which makes it,
yeah,
it's got
it's
that little
it's like
sing-songy
an evil
nature to
Dr.
it.
Seuss book. Um
Yeah.
and so, and the kid freaks out. Is the Babadook gonna get us, mom? And then the rest of the movie, the kid is like worried about the Babadook, right? And
Mhm.
and so she removes the Babadook book from sight, but this book just won't stay put. Ooh, that rhymed too.
Mhm.
Anyway, um, and so the at this point, you've had a lot of the beginning of this movie is setting up her isolation, her depression, her PTSD basically over her husband's, the tension she has with her child, and this is when the
Mhm.
weird stuff starts. Once this
Yeah.
book gets read,
Where it becomes a
suddenly
little bit more external, like things are happening and what's causing it to
well,
happen.
I would argue not quite yet. And that's actually one of the things I think is really, really clever about this movie is that it
Okay.
for a while, right? I would say like if like the first act is just like the setup, right, until you get to the book. The second act basically is allowing you as a viewer to just ask the questions like what is going on?
Mhm.
Because so the first thing that really is weird is there's glass in her soup. She goes
Yeah.
and, she's eating dinner with her son, right? And suddenly gets a cut in her mouth, and she, like, starts spooning through her soup, and there's glass shards in it. And the child's like,
Mhm.
"It's the Babadook, mum." This is an Australian movie, so, like, "It's the Babadook, mum." And, and
Whew, I
and
was taken out of it for a second until I heard the accent. Then I was like, "Oh, that's right. Yeah, exactly. The realism. It's bringing me back in."
yeah, there you go.
So, but anyway,
Uh,
yeah, no, I forgot about that. That's a
yeah.
very creepy, like,
It is, it's like and because listen, this kid is obsessed with the Babadook. He starts to make little, like, contraptions, like, like, there's, like,
like
an
a
edge of
catapult.
violence, yeah, like
The
a catapult,
Yeah.
there's a crossbow, he makes a homemade
Yeah.
crossbow. In other words,
Which
he's gotten into fights with kids at school.
I was gonna say that's what got him kicked out, I think, was that he
He's
built the
got
crossbow.
violent tendencies, right? And so there is, like, he has exhibited signs of being potentially dangerous. Right? And when he
Mm,
talks about the Babadook, he's like, "I'm gonna smash his head, mom. I'm gonna kill him." Like he's and these are just things that you don't like hearing coming out of the mouth of a 6-year-old.
mhm.
And so the kid is really creepy, basically, in the beginning of this movie, right? And so when she's got glass shards in her soup, and the kid's like, "Oh, it's the Babadook, mom. See, I told you the Babadook's gonna get you." And it's like,
Mm.
is this kid
So
okay?
then you think, is the kid
Yeah,
doing it?
yeah,
Yeah.
is this the
Like,
kid?
that's the
What's going on here, The mom doesn't know where the
mm,
book came from. Like, where did this book come
yeah.
from? The kid brings it, right? Um, the kid's obsessed with the Babadook, and she's like, "He's just made up." You don't he claims to see him everywhere. He
Yep.
definitely he definitely kinda comes across as crazy. The kid does, right?
Mhm.
But then as the movie progresses, so does she. Right?
Mm.
And suddenly you start to get little hints that it's not the kid. Like, the
Yeah.
mom is kinda crazy. So, for example, I love there's a little hint drops, she's at a birthday party with her sisters, and she's, like, being isolated with all these other women that don't have the same problems that she has, and they're like, "Well,
Mm.
tell what's your" she's like, "Well, I used to write children's books." And it's like, "Oh, red
Mm.
flag," you know? Like,
Mm.
is and,
Yeah.
the entire movie has demonstrated that she's got, like, insomnia, that she's kinda, like, out of it a lot, and she's slowly unraveling, and it's like, did she write the book? Is the
Yeah, and
book
then forget
did
that she
she
did,
tr
like, she
well, yeah, did
was
she, like, did
yeah.
it, like, sleepwalk, or is she crazy? Is she just, like, straight crazy?
Mm.
Has, like, all the guilt and repression and tragedy just, like,
It's just
broke her, you know? And so, like, yeah, did she write the book? And just not
yeah.
know, split personality stuff. And,
Mhm.
and then like,
She
she
lashes out at one of the moms too, and to make things awkward. So there you're getting
Mhm.
that kinda, like, social thing that
Isolation
we've all
thing
been
going.
heaping on her son, though. Like, the son is the one getting in trouble at school, like,
Oh,
having
yeah.
social issues, but now she's manifesting the same thing, right,
Mhm.
in the adult version of it.
Oh, and
And
arguably,
so
she's
then
the
you
one that
have
drove
the
her coworker away, right? Like, the coworker was still like,
yeah.
"Oh, well, you're not sick, okay." But then she kinda freaks out, and I think, like, that's what
Mhm.
really kinda, it takes 2 to
So
tango in this relationship,
mhm.
And, so, like, this whole middle segment of the movie is just a spiral into insanity and a questioning of because the kid says there's this other entity called the Babadook. The kid believes the Babadook is afflicting them. The mother keeps denying it. Is it the kid? Is it the mom? Is there a Babadook? I think the movie does a good job of, like, allowing you to wonder for a
Yeah.
long time. I think the real giveaway that there's something really strange going on, though, is, like, eventually the book shows back up, and she's already tried
Mhm.
to get rid of it, tore it apart, kind of thing, and, like, frustration, and it's
Yeah.
it's stitched back together. Like, she hears a doorbell, right?
But
Is it in her head?
differently, but yeah.
And then she, like, goes to the door, and that book's on her doorstep, and it's like, is this in her
Mhm.
head? She opens it up, and it's all stitched back together, but it's got new words in it, and
Yeah.
this time it's much more violence. Now it shows
Mm.
her killing the family dog. It shows her hurting
Killing the
herself and her
son,
kid. Yeah.
and then then
Maybe we should
herself,
have
yeah.
said exclaimers, like, hey, this is a dark movie. It's got really serious subject matter in it, folks. So
It's a monster in the house.
it's a
It's
little
there's
little
a
too late
yeah.
to give that exclaimer, but disclaimer,
Well,
but I keep
if
calling it
you've Googled
disclaimer.
the movie, you know what it's rated, so,
Yeah, this
yeah.
is and I'll say this much, it's a very clean horror movie. This is unlike,
Yeah.
for example, Cabin in the Woods. There's a lot of grotesquerie in that might turn some people off. This is pure kind of psychological horror. And so there's not a
Mm.
lot of, like, cussing or blood or
No,
gore,
nothing
nothing like that.
salacious,
Yeah,
nothing
it's
yeah,
not salacious at
it's
all.
not
It's
which
just
to refer
disturbing.
back to Cabin in the Woods, those are all done ironically, but they're still there. So they
Mhm.
you still have to kinda, like, contend with it. Whereas here, even though it's very much it has a lot of things to say, it very much has a commentary, it doesn't have to, like, spell it out for you in the same way. So,
Mhm. Yeah, if you can stomach, like, a Hallmark, suspense movie about, like, a serial killer trying to, like, kill his 13th victim, then you could probably stomach this movie.
that's a
So
interesting, yeah, connection, I guess.
so, but, so she, finds this book, it's way more crazy, but here's the thing, by this point, she's already gone to a psychiatrist and gotten, like, medicine for the kid to dope him
Mm.
up and put him to sleep. So the kid's asleep. There's no way the kid could have reassembled this book, right? And
Mm.
so at this point, it's like, okay, either she's doing this or there's something really weird going on. And it's at this
And this is
point,
also when we start to see, something is moving, some sort of shadowy figure, right?
yeah,
Shadowy
things
figure is
start to
moving.
really spiral after this moment
Yeah.
because now she's seen the Babadook everywhere. She
Mm.
has hardcore insomnia at this point. She's watching old black and white movies at night and the Babadook showing up in the
In the movie,
neighbor's
yeah.
house. She goes and she begins to think that she's being stalked. Like, okay, there is
Mm.
a third party, but it's got to be a stalker, right?
Yeah.
She doesn't believe it's supernatural or nothing like
Well,
that.
because yeah, there's the phone call too where she hears the voice
Yeah,
on the other end.
that's right,
So
Babadook.
so
Creepy,
yeah, so
creepy
there's
stuff.
another
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she goes to the police. So she's like, I'm being stalked. Someone's sending me crazy books and all that stuff. And she sees the Babadook's clothing behind the police officer. And suddenly
Oh
all
yeah.
the police officers seem very nefarious looking. Like they're just kind of
Mm.
staring at her because she's a crazy lady at this point. But from her perspective, the police officers look really scary, right?
Like they're
And
in on it,
they're
sort of
in on
thing.
it. They're
Yeah.
in on it,
Mm.
kind of thing. And so she's losing it hardcore. CPS shows up at this point, and CPS isn't nefarious, but
It's because the kid
it's a
hasn't been showing up
stressor.
to school.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a stressor, and suddenly,
So it's a legitimate thing.
it is. It's scary that CPS shows up at your door, and this is right when she's having a basically she's seeing cockroaches everywhere infesting her
Mhm.
house. And
Yeah.
when she goes to tell the CPS people, "Oh, excuse the mess, the cockroaches," there's no cockroaches. There's no hole in the wall where cockroaches are supposedly coming out of. And she looks
Yep.
crazy again, right? And you pointed this out when we were talking about this, that like, oh, the neighbor's name is Mrs. Roach. And it's like,
And she
huh.
keeps coming over.
Yeah, I never actually
Yeah.
I never made that
She
connection
keeps coming
until,
over. Yeah.
which is kind of silly that I didn't pick up on that. But yeah, and I think for my money, I think that sounds like she is Mrs. Roach is just another problem in her life, right?
Mhm.
Infesting her life, kind of like what you're saying,
Infesting her life. Very good.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Ah,
A little on the
a
nose, a
little,
little on the nose, but that's a little on the top hat, but that's all right.
a little
So,
on the top hat.
um, yeah, like it's been progressively getting worse, getting, more and more scary, more and more, and then it actually starts to turn violent. And this is where it's kind of I guess you'd say the big kind of climactic,
Like the third
act
the
or
third
scene.
arc, the third act, yeah, is when all the cards are
Is
on the table, I would say. Well, I
mm.
kind of, right? I actually think this is a very interesting movie textually.
No, but we got to move on. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. This is my nice way of
I
saying,
know, right? We
let's,
gotta go, we gotta go. So
yeah.
anyway, suddenly she goes into the basement one day because she's, and she sees a vision of her husband, but it's the Babadook in the guise of her husband, and she basically
Mm,
gets possessed by him. The Babadook possesses the woman. And so at this
mhm.
point, the movie has really gone really far in the direction of, no, these actually are people being afflicted by an external presence, right? And
It's now, and this is where it got into our whole, is this a possession flick? Is this a possession movie? Right. But
it,
it's not the typical possession movie because there's
this
no,
is not the priest has to
actual,
come exorcise the child in, heads twisted on their bodies type movie. No,
yep.
this is very non-religiously context, framed movie.
Mhm.
Religion doesn't come up explicitly in this movie.
And
But I
yet,
think it's
what we
impossible.
like about
Yeah.
it is the same spiritual realities are there, even though they don't have the same trappings of what you would typically see in a possession movie. And in some ways, you were saying that's to its credit, that's to its benefit.
Oh, I
It
think
can almost
so.
have a greater evangelical value because it doesn't have that sort of baggage that some people would
Especially in today's
associate with it.
climate, right? I mean, like, so
Yeah.
here's the thing. Like, I love all the Catholic horror movies out there and like the possession horror movies. I think that they are fun and valuable in their own right. But I will say that they turn demons into like Freddy Krueger, right? Like it's
Mm.
not it feels like it's a monster movie and it doesn't feel like it's correlating to
And
most people's lived experience, right?
it's where it falls short too is it starts to give the impression that's the only way that a demon can be scary is if it has the, like you said, if they make it like Freddy Krueger.
Mhm.
And that's, again, even from a classical Christian, Catholic theological understanding, that's not where the demons do the most damage. Is not because they, have the knife or the saw hands or whatever. Like that's the Hollywood version, so to speak.
This is a good opportunity to just go through the 4 stages. I put them in the outline. That's right, folks. I did the
Yeah.
outline for this one. But, I kinda condensed them a
So
little
you
bit.
can send your complaints too. No, I just well, and actually what I like about it too is so if you look at these 4, and we'll go over them in just a second, you can almost see the progression in the Babadook movie too.
Mhm.
Where, so like
Even
the
though the
first one is
Babadook movie will
infestation.
never using Catholic, authority.
No.
It's
And
just
we have
but
no
the
idea if the
parallels are
writers or the
crazy.
directors were.
I've never
Yeah.
even looked it up. I have no idea how
No.
much what familiarity she
Yeah.
has,
Never
So
even
go on.
occurred to me to look it up. So
Yeah.
the first one is infestation, which, you simply put is haunted house stuff. and we start to see, its voices. We have the knocking on the door, or the footsteps or objects moving, which we'll kind of see later on as well. So that's the infestation. That's
Mhm.
that kind of that first step. The next one is oppression, which is physical attacks, sleep disturbances. Oh, wow. Huh. I
Yeah.
wonder if we've
Oh,
seen any of that.
disturbed sleep, huh?
Yeah.
Mhm.
The nightmares, the illness too, which again, not you could see sort of the parallel to obviously mental illness, the depression and anxiety we definitely see manifested in these characters
Or
too.
definitely that, yeah.
Relationship problems, right? So it's like
Mhm.
that next step or that next stage of oppression is all over the movie, all over the place.
All over
Um,
the movie and all over everyone's lives, right? I mean,
well,
like,
yeah, certainly.
and so we'll get into it. I just want to point out, like, what we were saying was this movie, in some sense, it's beneficial that this movie doesn't come at it from a traditional demon possession angle, because what this movie shows you is that everyone experiences the oppression of demons.
Mhm.
Everyone does, you know. Now, when it starts to get really ramped up, that's when you start to like take notice and things like that. But it helps people. I think this helps modern people who are so dismissive of this idea of demon oppression as something that head spinning. No,
Yep.
man. How is your sleep? How are your relationships? How is your mood?
Mhm.
What's your anxiety like? You know.
And if we want to look at it from a a lowercase c Catholic perspective, if the whole idea is that God is trying to communicate his grace and his life to as wide a group as possible, then in a sense, you want that kind of like lowest threshold, lowest common denominator when it comes to these different stages, because that's where then most people can recognize the need. They can recognize the need for grace when, like you said, it doesn't have to be this like specific or special example of like the monster in the house. Sometimes the house is us, and the monster is our own subconscious or our own anxiety or cutting off of relationships, things like that.
And this is not watering down, like, classical Christian teaching on demonic activity. This is not moving the
Mm-mm.
goalpost. No one ever said that Christianity thinks that demon activity is spinning heads, right?
Mm.
No. Christianity says that demonic activity is the stuff that this movie is talking about, right? It's just
Mm.
this movie does a really good job of drawing attention to it.
And
So,
it's not an either or, it's a both and, right? I mean,
mhm.
that's always been the case. So
So
so yeah,
oppression.
the third one is obsession, which again, it's almost like, again, you can see kind of the ramping up, similar to the ramping up that we've seen in the movie itself. But afflicted person having a hard time functioning at all,
Yep.
preoccupied with now,
Amelia really
it could
gets to
be,
this place, definitely gets to this place.
well, there again, she's seeing
There's
the
a
Babadook,
super
she's
creepy
seeing the demon
scene
everywhere.
where she's sitting in the bathtub, you know? Remember that
Oh
moment
yeah.
where, like, it's like, "Oh, yeah, she's lost it." Like, she's done.
Mhm.
And she brings the kid in the bathtub, and at this point, you're worried for the child. At this
Yep.
point, it's like,
Well, and you've already seen the foreshadowing, or what seems to be
the Babadook
foreshadowing of.
book has depicted her hurting him, killing herself, which,
Mhm.
is,
And there was the news story that she's watching on TV because she's watching,
oh,
and do you remember it's
yeah,
the
she
news story
sees
about the
there's a news
mom
story about a
who
mother killing her child,
kills
and
her kid,
she's
and then she's
smiling in the
killed by the
window.
police, and she sees herself in the window, yep, of
Yeah,
the
there's some
newscast or
really
whatever.
creepy
So
elements in this
there's
movie.
some so there's all this foreshadowing, and then like you said, you're like, "Oh boy, here it comes,"
Mhm,
it's it's gonna happen.
and
I thought Mrs. Roach was gonna get it, to be honest. I thought she was gonna be the one to but she
yeah,
lives, she lives. Unfortunately,
yeah,
not
it's
everybody
worse.
though, right?
It's worse. It's
Yeah.
not Mrs. Roach.
The dog gets
It's
it.
the
The dog
dog.
gets
They
it.
kill the dog, which honestly,
Yeah. I
that's
heard
such an
I heard it was
efficient
John
short.
Wick's dog, actually.
Oh, the
It
sequel
was
to this
John,
movie is
yeah.
her going and taking vengeance against the Babadook's family. So,
Oh, nice.
yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yes. But, the, you know oh, I just love that John Wick joke made me lose my train of thought. But oh, no, that's what it was.
Of
It's
course.
it's
Yeah.
it's it's such good if you want a movie to really freak an audience out, kill the dog, right? I mean,
Mhm.
like, we'll worry about humans being killed, I guess, but, like,
Well,
kill a
and the
dog and
thing too
suddenly it's like,
is,
"Oh, this lady's crazy," you
and I
know?
did say to you, it does kind of allow for there to be lower consequences in terms of like she's not going to go to jail, or at least she's going to get away with that, whereas she's not going to get away with killing Mrs. Roach or killing the kid. So it does allow for a sort of resolution, which
this is post possession, by the way, right? So like she's I guess just finish the fourth category of
So then so possession is, the person, I mean, even though technically they have free will is not removed, but it's been severely compromised. It's compromised to the point where it's like you have lower culpability, right? And yet it's still technically you. So your defenses are so down that you're very suggestible to whatever
like
this demon.
Almost.
Yeah, so this demon. Oh, hypnotism. We're going to talk about Get Out too, right? No, sorry.
Well, one thing that a hypnotist
kind of pull the veil away. Yeah.
What a hypnotist. You probably don't want me to talk about Get Out, but what a hypnotist will tell you is that he can't make anyone do anything they're not willing to do. I mean, that's classic hypnotism. Like I've gone to shows where like hypnotists like do things, pull people out of the audience and things like that, and like. There's always a disclaimer because people are worried, like, oh, a hypnotist is going to make me do something. And like a hypnotist is like, I'm not going to. Like, I mean, they're going to have fun. This is going to be goofy or whatever. But like, a hypnotist cannot hypnotize you into like murdering your own child. You have to be willing to do that.
That had to have already been there in some seed form, which again, that's maybe the creepiest part about this is if that is really the case, then that has to tell us, the viewer, that, that was already there in a sense before.
Well, we're going to get, I think by the end of this conversation, we're going to talk about these things, right?
So some of the examples of this last one of possession, we don't really see like superhuman strength or the speaking in tongues on that sort of thing, but the changes in facial features when it's like she kind of takes on this like other face almost.
She has some vocal changes too.
That's so. Yeah. So that's where, that really kind of tells you like, oh, this isn't Amelia anymore. This isn't her,
Yeah.
So
well, and then if you start at the top, infestation, that's haunted house stuff. In this movie, we have a mysterious book showing up. We have glass showing up in the soup. We have lights flickering. Like throughout the movie, lights flicker strangely and things like that. Yep. There's definitely poltergeist-like activity that starts to take place in this movie.
The knock on the door. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. The phone call, right? And then dang it, what's the second one? It goes infestation. It goes
oppression.
Yeah. Well, that one's the most obvious because that's the insomnia. That's the anxiety and depression, the relationship problems, the financial problems. They make a reference to. Or I lit my room because Babadook, remember?
Giving a vibe. Yeah.
Yeah. Now there's creepy smoke coming in here. But anyway, happy Halloween. But
then obsession, which we see a lot of
financial issues when it comes to the oppression and things like that. The movie references her not having any money. And then obsession, the conspiracy theorizing, everyone's out to get me, the police are out to get me, all this stuff. And then obviously possession, that's when she just goes crazy. Like the movie shows her get possessed, her eyeballs dilate. There's definitely physiological things that the movie depicts, implying that it's not just her still being crazy, that there's something else at work here. And that's when the most severe stuff starts to happen. She kills the dog, right? She and then right after that, it's so nefarious, it's so diabolical. Because she's like, oh, the dog's sick, honey. Dog's sick. We have to take him, come on, let's go. She's like gonna she's drawing the kid to her, and stuff like that. Because he's like, oh no, you're possessed. He figures it out like right quick. What were you gonna say?
And she grabs the knife, which at first it's thought, oh, it's to protect. When now it's gonna turn on, because that and there again, that's also foreshadowed in the book that she uses the knife on herself too. So you're thinking, and I think wasn't there a scene where like you don't see it happen, but the camera looks down and she's holding the knife and she didn't realize she was holding it.
Oh, so it's a really creepy moment where like she's having dreams, she's having crazy dreams and things like that. And like, so the line between reality and her insomnia and dreaming and things like that gets blurred a lot in this movie. And so there's this moment where she's like she thinks that she's like going to help her. I forget kind of the context, but suddenly she like her kid is screaming and she kind of like snaps out of it and she's
Yeah.
standing over him holding the knife in her hand. And he's freaked
Yeah.
out because his mom is standing over him holding a knife in her hand, and she's
Mhm.
like, "Oh no, what am I doing?" Right? She's losing her grip. Um
Yeah.
and so she's killed the dog in the kitchen. She's like, "We gotta get the dog," and he's like, "You're not okay, mommy." And she's like, "No, come here, honey," kind of thing. And she's acting all like faux
Mm.
motherly to him, but her arms
Mhm.
are like slow. Her hands are slowly like creeping around his neck. And
Yeah.
that's when he stabs her in the leg. That's when he's
Yeah.
like, "You're not my mom." And,
Which yeah,
he stabs her, he gets the knife and he stabs her in the leg, right? And the rest of the climactic scenes here is her chasing her own son through the house, Jack Nicholson
Mhm.
style. And,
Yeah.
but that's where this is great, this is good script writing, that's where all those Babadook, weaponry he basically home alones his mom and,
Yeah,
has all these
yeah.
weapons in place to use
So
against his
so he's
mom.
got gets her with the crossbow, he uses a dart, like, on a
Yeah,
dartboard.
like a
Um,
dartboard dart in her arm. He catapults her
yeah.
in the head with a cricket ball, or
Oh, yeah.
what's that, thing you hit the balls through the, little
The croquet? Is that what you mean?
croquet. I think it's a croquet ball.
Or
Yeah.
okay.
Um, and he runs to the basement. He flees to the basement where his dad's at, right? Isn't that the idea? And she chases
Mm.
him down there. And when he gets her in the head with his catapult, she falls down the stairs and gets knocked out and wakes up tied up, right?
Yep.
But she's like
Yeah.
full on Babadook at this point, full on possession.
Mm.
And he is a pitiful, sad 6-year-old kid who just wants his mom back. This movie is
Mm.
so good at hitting all the feels all at once, right?
Mm.
Um, it's
Yeah.
such an emotional story, and he's like, "Don't let him control you, mom. Don't let him control you, or whatever." And she breaks free from the ropes, and she starts to really choke her kid. At this point,
Mhm.
she's getting him, and he manages to get his hand on her face and, I'm getting surprisingly emotional at this moment. He
I was
puts
gonna
his
say,
hand
I
on
was
her
like,
face.
"Oh."
I know, I was getting a little choked up here. Puts his hand
I was like, "Yeah,"
on her
like,
face, and, he's like, "I know he won't let you love me, but I'll always love you."
oh. And it
It's
does honestly, the kid's hand on the face, it takes you back, and I think, of course, I think this has to be on purpose, of it's like when a mother gives birth to a new baby, and the first thing they'll do is they'll put the baby on the mother's, skin-to-skin contact, and the baby can't even barely see much further away than the distance between him or herself and the mom, and they put their hand on the mother's face, and it's supposed to kinda
Mhm.
bring you back to that, which obviously that's the whole thing, is the birth of
Yeah.
this
Well,
son.
it
That's
turns her
where
into it's bringing the mother
it's the
back.
healing. It's the
Yeah,
healing. Yeah, it's
yeah.
it's the healing moment of
It's
what it should have
restoring the
been
mother
the
relationship, the
day that it
maternal.
happened,
Yeah.
you
Because,
know?
we've had moments in the movie where, like, she's not being able to fully embrace her motherhood to this child
Mhm.
because of the PTSD, because of the tragedy. And, so I know he won't let you love me, mom, but I'll always love you. And,
Man, the Babadook, you'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll scream. It's
it's
like
it's a it's
that
a
should be
this is
the
a
new
very good movie.
tagline.
This is a very good movie.
You'll
Um, and,
yeah.
uh, and that breaks the Babadook spell over the mom. And
Mm.
so, like, and
Which it's like,
Essie
what's
Davis,
gonna win in the end? Love wins in the end. It's like unbelievable how Christian can you get when
yeah.
it's like sacrificial charity wins in the end. That's what kills the demon, so to speak. Or,
Well,
well, not kills necessarily, but frees the person. That's what frees the person
this
is
is a
the
good moment
sacrificial charity.
to just give kudos to Essie Davis is the name of the actress who plays Amelia, and
Mm,
she is a powerhouse in this movie. Like, she wears so many emotions on her face
mm,
this entire film. And in this moment where, like, she basically, like, screams after the child does that to her, and it's like the ripping the Babadook from her, and she's ripping herself away from the Babadook or whatever, and she
and there's a
basically.
purgation that happens.
Yeah, and then
There's
she
a
throws the
purging.
child off her, and she gets on all fours, and she just starts puking up all kinds of black bile. Now, if you really want your demon possession symbolism, in that your
I mean,
traditional
yeah.
symbolism in a demon possession movie, you
Yeah.
get it. Here it is.
You've got the throwing up
She's
and you've got the black bile. Yeah.
yeah,
It's
and the bile is very inky, you know, so it's almost like it's kind of evokes like the ink drawings in like the Babadook movie and like the book, you know.
mm,
Um, and another reason why this isn't all in her head because she gets it all over her clothes. So like the rest of the
yep.
movie, she's got like real Babadook bile all over her and things like that. And you know, so she's cured of the Babadook, so to speak, right? But here's the thing: you can't get rid of the Babadook. And so they
Mm.
walk upstairs. You have this false sense of security as a viewer, and the kid's like, "You can't get rid of the Babadook, mommy." And then all of a sudden, he gets supernaturally flung up the stairs, right? And so she chases after him. She has a massive final confrontation, very loud. The ceiling's cracking and things like that. And the Babadook has these giant wings that are like kind of like, you know, and she screams at him, you
Very
know,
like
this,
bat-like or
yeah,
demonic again. So there again,
absolutely.
it's
Well,
yeah.
kind of crow-like, really. But then she's like, "This is my house, and you are trespassing here." And she kind of like stands up to him, and she's like, "If you ever touch my kid, I'm going to kill you." Like she starts to have all these weapons to use
Mm.
against the Babadook, right?
Well, it's that
And
same anger. That same anger is now turned on the real monster. It's not turned
it's
on
like a
herself
righteous
anymore
or her
because it
kid,
was. Yeah,
right?
it was turned on herself or turned on her family for this whole movie, and now
Yep.
it's turned on the
She
monster,
sees who
the
her
where
real
it's
enemy
supposed
is.
to be.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
and she knows that like she can fight back against him. And so
Mm.
she yells these things at him, and she basically just like kind of stands up to him and squares up to him and like, you know, basically casts him out, right? Like so to speak.
Oh, is there
Um
an exorcism then? Yeah, exorcises the demon. I mean,
and then all of a
it's
sudden, instead of being a giant weird crow creature, he's a scarecrow. The movie transition
mm,
like suddenly he's empty. Like, you know,
mm,
a scarecrow is not a real person. A scarecrow is just something
yeah.
that's supposed to be scary, but it's not real. And the scarecrow falls over, loses power, but all of a sudden you get like the crazy cam, and he flees to the basement because you can't get rid
Mhm,
of the Babadook. And so,
mm.
but you can learn to control him. So he flees to his home in the basement. And the movie
You make friends with the Babadook, right? Yeah. I mean,
we're gonna
not
get there.
exactly.
Where I'm not gonna
Yeah,
go.
yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
gonna go that route. But
Yeah.
what the epilogue of this movie, CPS is back, but now the relationship between the mom and the son is much better and also less embarrassed, right? Like he says kind of off color things, and she's like, "Yeah, he does that." And so there's just authenticity and honesty in the relationship between her and her son, and you know CPS is cool with it. And then the final moments of this movie are almost dreamlike because
Mm.
suddenly you're in a backyard that you really haven't seen the entire movie.
It's
It's
sunny
a
out. Yeah,
garden.
it's
It's
not
the
overcast
color
anymore.
palette. This entire movie is like super blue, just blues
Mm.
everywhere. Adds to like it's like a Picasso blue period, like,
Yeah.
and it adds to the depression. And it takes place at night. It gets really dark. It's very colored blue.
Mm.
But in this garden scene, it's all flowers. It's a garden. It's rosy. She's in her pink work uniform. He's a magician. That's
Mm.
his hobby throughout the movie. And like he does a magic trick where he pulls a dove out where there shouldn't be. And it's
Oh,
like,
yeah. And
is
she
that
doesn't
six
even,
year
like,
old?
question it.
Is that
Yeah.
6-year-old like able to do that? And that's why it's very
Yeah.
dreamlike. It's a very dream, and that's why this movie doesn't actually ends conclusively, in my opinion. In the
Well, and
sense
I
that I
think
do think
that's
it's got a happy ending, but it becomes a fairy tale ending.
a lot of horror movies will even have that sort of, like, final twist in the
Little
resolution where it's like,
ambiguity.
"Oh" yeah, where it's like, "Oh, is the" who's the
Well,
real
but here's the
monster? Who's the
thing.
monster coming back? And
This movie,
so you
though,
get a yeah.
the ambiguity is not like the monster win because we see that. Like, and so she's gathering worms in the backyard. She brings it into the
Mhm.
house. The Babadook comes
With a
out of
bowl.
the basement screaming, yelling as loud as ever, and she's just like, "Calm down," and like gives him his bowl of worms, and then it like
And then you see
supernaturally
the bowl
flies across
just
the
fly
flies into
into
the dark corner,
the darkness.
goes back out to her son, and the son's like, "How's the Babadook?" And she's like, he's okay. Like he's a little crazy, but nothing I haven't seen before, right? And
It's
that's
like
how
their
this movie
code for
ends.
when she's feeling a certain way is,
Well,
it's
and
like the
that's what
code of
by
how's the
the end of this
Babadook.
movie, I think that the film itself doesn't care if this is all metaphor for mental illness, if it
Mhm.
is demonic possession, if it like the specifics of that. That's why it's almost mythic as a story.
Mm.
Is like the journalistic specifics just like do not matter. The only thing that matters by
No,
the end of it is that
it's the
everything's
hyper real.
okay.
What's the deeper reality that you're learning from it or that you're taking from it? Which I mean, that's every myth, right? That's every and
Mhm.
whether it's grounded in some sense of reality or semblance of reality. This takes place in the quote unquote real world of Australia. In the modern day, right? You're never supposed to get the feeling that this is
Yeah, this
obviously not the
movie
1800s or
especially and that's the thing. I mean, if you take the movie holistically, this movie starts out extremely realistic, reality-based, gritty mental
mm,
illness. By the end of the movie, you're in a weird garden where the kid's doing magic and there's a Babadook in the basement.
it's the fairy world
It's
is
super
where you
fairy. It's
end up.
super fairy by the
Yeah.
end of the movie. And that journey has been so gradual that it's like you're in a fairy tale before you even realize what's happening. And which is appropriate for a movie about a children's book, right? I mean,
Mm,
like it's all thematic to just the overall atmosphere of this film.
mhm.
But the what you do know no matter what. Whether the Babadook's real or not, whether what you saw leading up to this is real, what you know is that she's come to terms with her grief. And that doesn't make the grief go away. It doesn't make it
No.
better. Like you don't have to befriend the tragedy in your life, but you
Mhm,
can live with it. And
mhm.
and you can be at peace. The kid he
And
brings a dove, right? His magic act is like a dove, famous like symbol of
yeah.
peace, symbol of the Holy Spirit, right?
Mhm.
Peace that passes all understanding,
Well
right?
well, and I think what you're touching so it reminds me of, I mean, first of all, I think it's obviously importantly metaphorical that it's magic because like you said, you've already gone over some of the more mythical or fairy tale like qualities here, but like you were saying is that the whole thing about grief is that it's not something that you can just get rid of. It's more, do you have the proper, tools to manage it? And that's kind of what, magic was always trying to be is that you are harnessing this chaotic like reality into man and using it in a way that benefits you, right?
Mhm.
You're harnessing whether it's the energy of the universe or whatever language you want to use, but the idea is that you're harnessing it towards some end, some you're the agent, right? You're the one who gets to determine where it's going to go. And like I said, on a natural level, you can almost see a metaphor in like fire itself, where it's like fire is this very, very powerful thing that can be very destructive and kill everyone and destroy everything, or it can be something that helps cultivate life and community and hearth. And so that's kind of, they don't use the fire metaphor as much. That was just one that I was kind of
Yeah.
thinking of. But I think magic is a perfect kind of
You're not making
analogy,
an
right?
outline for a new
Especially
episode, are you, Mike?
I mean, you're the one who always talks about magic all the time, but I figured, it was low-hanging fruit. The kid is
Yeah.
a magician
No,
in the
absolutely.
movie.
Yeah, no,
So,
absolutely. No, 100%. So,
I guess
yeah,
there is going to be a fire episode.
yeah,
So,
that's
that's
what
probably what you're thinking of. Yeah. There is going to be a fire episode for sure. There's just so much symbolism, I mean, to fire. So, it's so especially in Christian symbolism and mythical symbolism. So, we got to go
So,
there eventually.
yeah,
Once we
the
get done
the
with all these horror movies, I'm
I
like
love October.
scarred for yeah.
The big takeaway for Christians in this movie is that in a lot of ways, it's a possession movie. Yeah, it's really a repentance movie
Mm,
because I think that people outside of the Christian context think that or especially even Protestants, right? Even people outside of a classical Christian context where we have all these
mm,
prayers. It's like I'm a sinner, I'm a sinner, I'm a sinner, I'm a sinner, right?
mm,
And I remember feeling that way. It's like, oh, you're liberated from sin. You don't have to worry about sin anymore. Why you keep calling yourself a sinner? Things like that, right?
mm,
Um, I think it's not sadomasochism, right? It's
mm,
not an obsession with sin. That's the caricature, right? Especially of the Catholic Church, right? Like that's the caricature.
mm.
Um,
Yeah.
and It's not. What it is it's like a Jungian idea of self,
We all
like
feel
knowing your
really guilty
shadow
about that,
self.
by the way. We feel really guilty about that, that we've made that impression,
The
but, moving
caricature,
on.
yeah, the
Yeah.
character of guilt
Yeah.
makes you feel guilty. Sure it
Yep.
does.
Yeah.
But anyway, like
What's new?
Young
Yeah.
has this shadow self thing, where it's like you have to understand that there's a darkness in you. You have to know
Mhm.
it's there, and you can't pretend it's not. You can't repress it like some kinda, like, weird Victorian prude. You can't pretend that it doesn't matter or that it's irrelevant or whatever. Like, you have to
Mhm.
understand that you can't get rid of the Babadook.
Mhm.
One day we believe we will,
Or
though, right? Like, one day the Babadook's gonna get cast into a big old lake of fire.
well, I was gonna say,
But
that's when we talk about the significance in the life of Jesus of the transfiguration. Nobody
yeah,
in a sense was healed in a conventional sense in the transfiguration. Right?
yeah,
And in a sense, you couldn't even say, oh, well, Peter, James, and John, they were the only ones. They already had faith. They were already apostles. And yet the transfiguration still had objective value, right? Or evangelical value to kind of bring this full circle. And that's where, like you said, the whole idea of the Christian life is a transfiguration, even of, like you were saying, the shadow self, right?
mhm.
There's
Well
this, I mean,
well, and here's what I just wanna say, though, is, like, even the greatest saints, they don't feel like they've gotten rid of the Babadook, right? In the minute you feel like you've gotten rid of the Babadook, it just means that you don't know what you're talking about. In other
mm,
words, like, up until Saint Macarius puts his foot through that door in the desert and says, "Not yet," right?
mm,
Because he knows better. He knows that
mm,
Satan is a lion seeking whom he can devour. And Christ retrieves us from like the jaws of that. But not, we'll struggle with that our entire lives. Our sin is
mm.
going to crouch at our door up until we die.
Or the Babadook's going to eat worms in our basement
Up until we die. That's right. Exactly.
until the
Exactly.
eschaton. Yeah.
And so
So,
if there's any reconciliation with the Babadook as such in the basement there, it's not like, "Oh, I like the Babadook." It's just that like,
mm.
"Hey, Christ has
It
given
doesn't
us an
become a good guy.
opportunity."
Yeah.
Yeah, the Babadook's not a good guy. Grief is not something that we like reconcile to. It's something that we live with. Sin is not something we reconcile to. It's something that we live through, you know. And Christ takes care of us, right? We just keep walking the straight and narrow as best we can, and Christ offers the forgiveness when we fail, right? Um, but and then we have an assurance that it won't always be like that in the grand scheme of things, you know. But so this movie teaches us that like you can understand the darkness within you, but you can live
Mhm.
with it and you can still serve Christ, and that's what repentance is all about, you know. And that's ultimately what exorcism's all about, and all that stuff.
Well, that I think it's a good kind of note to end on too is because we spent some time talking about exorcism. We've seen this sort of like modern, almost like materialistic exorcism episode, even though, yes, I'm not trying to argue that it's purely materialistic. We've kind of gone through this and you've shown, or the movie shows clearly that there's a lot of ambiguity of, is there a sort of pseudo spiritual side to how the movie even presents it? But you'll talk to any priest, any actual qualified exorcist, and they'll say the point of exorcism is it's ultimately evangelization. It's repentance and drawing closer to Christ, which sounds boring on the surface unless you truly understand what repentance and drawing closer to Christ really means. And
Mhm.
I remember hearing this as a kid. In my hearing from a priest, like, it's much more power. What's way more powerful than an exorcist is a good confession. And I thought, but that sounds so boring, right? A good
Yeah.
confession. That's like,
Oh, come
that's not
on.
exciting like a movie.
Mhm.
There's no movies
I
made
wanna
about a good
puke green
confession.
stuff, come on.
Yeah. And it's like, so it's the fascination with this, with the, I guess the macabre or
The
whatever.
thrill,
Uh,
the
yeah.
thrill of
Or yeah,
the
or the
bile,
excitement, or I mean, there's a
Yeah.
reason why horror movies are popular and
Mhm.
exciting. So, and it's not because everybody sees the spiritual side to it, right? We know that's the case, but that's where God's power lies, right? It's in weakness that God's power is made perfect, or it was in the humiliation of the cross, not Jesus putting his foot down on top of his enemies, where God's power was really working. or you could say Jesus putting his foot down on his enemies was on the cross.
Mhm.
And so it's the same thing. There's way more power in a contrite confession in terms of like an honest confession. You're sorry for your sins. You're turning back to God than
Yep.
any exciting, quote unquote, exciting, exorcism that you might see or experience.
And confession being a powerful tool in our vigilant, constant state of repentance, right? And so really we talked about this, the whole concept came from a monster in the house idea. You want to do a monster in the house episode. Well, in the Christian tradition, our heart is our house, right? And like Christ talks about how like if you clean out your house, but you're not vigilant, then 7 more demons are going to come in.
The demons
and
return,
occupy that house, right? So the monster in the house is our heart. The Babadook in our house is the thing that Christ expels from us through baptism, through confession, and then our repentance is going to be how we live with the constant attacks of the enemy and things like that. The shield of faith and the fiery darts of the enemy, that has to do with knowing yourself, like the famous slogan from the School of Athens, and so
Plato, right? No, Socrates. Yeah. Plato said that. Oh man, if anybody watches this show long enough to get that long running Plato said it joke, then kudos. But you brought up this line
corporate overlords
earlier.
will send you a free T-shirt, folks. Right, corporate
wow,
overlords.
That's quite the
free T-shirts for everybody. Tell them Jacob sent you.
Okay. I was going to say, just because you don't get a T-shirt doesn't mean you have to like throw, give everybody else a T-shirt.
I'm just going to start handing out T-shirts.
You mentioned
till
this
I get
line.
One.
You mentioned this line, which is right from the book. If it's in a word or in a look, you can't get rid of the Babadook. But it's only the Word made flesh that gets rid of the Babadook. And
nice.
Close.
Thanks for listening to Voyage Podcast. The Voyage Podcast is a production of Voyage Comics and Publishing, which seeks to create exceptional entertainment informed by Catholic values that inspire people to live a heroic life. Voyage Comics seeks to advance truth and beauty found in powerful stories. To learn more, visit voyagecomics.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.